You made it, Mel.
You made it with a minute to spare.
Do you have what you need?
You know, as much as anybody does these days, I guess.
All right.
So
You've got control.
yeah, I don't know how to give that to you.
That's okay. You can control. We're all good.
So the only reason that it would really matter to have a co-host situation is if mom's going to share a screen too.
No.
We have the same screen.
Yeah. So as mom can just talk then, and you should be fine.
So much less professional. Mom can just talk.
All right, well, a couple of things I guess I would like to say is this is my first Zoom presentation, so bear with us. We just had a server go down, the email went down, like all of my videos that were queued up were ready to go. I lost them all, so hopefully this will go a little bit more smoothly than our preparation has.
I hope so. And I had to run from one office to the other so I could connect. So here we are. This is our trauma for the day.
Right. So what people can do if you care to is share your video, remain muted. While Sona is talking, she's going to be doing the first part of the presentation. I'll try to manage any chat that may be happening. So let's see. So I'm just gonna, I think, go ahead and start the slideshow, and Sona is gonna present. Let's try to use the chat or raise your hand if you have questions. We're trying to leave ample time at the end to answer any questions.
Okay, sounds good.
Right. You ready to go?
Right. Yep, ready to go. So Mel and I work for an agency on the East Coast in Massachusetts by the name of LUK. Both of us have been working at LUK for quite a while. We play different roles. Mel can introduce herself when she jumps in. We lost the share screen.
Yeah, it's not moving as a slide.
Not moving, okay. So at LUK, LUK is a multi-service social service agency. My role is as the Director of Residential Services, and we serve kids in different programs here between the ages of 0 and 22. We assume that all of the kids that we have in care with us are traumatized youth. And what Mel and I are going to be talking about today is traumatized youth in the context of the classroom as well as outdoor education. Because the kids that I have in my programs are also the kids that go to school in the community. They're the kids that engage in activities in the community. So they do everything out in the community except living in their homes. They live in our programs and our group homes. So we kind of assume that the kids that you guys are going to have are also the kids that we have in our programs. How are we doing on that sharing? Want me to give it a shot? Want me to give it a shot?
Sure.
Oh, it's disabled. I can't.
Hold on.
This is our trauma for the day, guys. Every time I have a presentation that involves electronics, this is my trauma. Because almost without fail, something happens with the electronics. It's got to be me. I don't know. So while we're trying to figure that out, hopefully by the time I'm done, Mel will have her piece done. Actually, what I will do is I will put my PowerPoint up small so that I can see where I'm going next. And then if Mel can share, I will just go off my PowerPoint. So I wanted to start out by actually defining what trauma is. A lot of times in social services, there are words that are just kind of thrown around out there, and people assume that everyone knows what they're talking about. But that sometimes just isn't the case. So sometimes as adults, we feel like we know what's best, that we know what kids experience, that we have all of that kind of stuff, that knowledge because we've lived life, because we might have training, but that just isn't always the case. So whenever a kid comes to us, whether it's us or in a classroom or anywhere else, they're bringing all of their history with them, they're bringing all of their past experiences with them, and it really shapes and affects a kid's behavior, feelings, relationships, as well as the whole view of the world that they might hold. So it really impacts everything that they do. Oh, hello. That is fantastic. Okay. So the can you go back one slide, Mel? Backwards.
Oh,
Going back.
what am I doing?
That one. Yep. That one.
All right.
There we go. So one definition of trauma says that trauma occurs when an actual or perceived threat of danger or loss overwhelms a person's usual coping ability. So that idea of an individual and how they perceive trauma and whether or not they can cope with it is really critical, because my trauma is not your trauma is not mine. So we all have these different perceptions of what trauma is, and we also all have different natural as well as learned coping strategies to be able to deal with it. The individual perception of trauma is really key in understanding how kids are responding, how they see the world, and how they're going to react to it. It often also produces these very intense physical feelings. And if there is one thing that is common across the board, it's these physiological responses to trauma. So regardless of how we perceive the trauma, our bodies perceive it in the same way. And if we are experiencing trauma, then chances are we're going to experience any number of physical effects, such as rapid heartbeats, rapid breathing, trembling, sweating, and all of that kind of stuff. Sometimes as adults, it's really tempting for us to try to comfort kids and therefore minimize their trauma by saying things like, it's not so bad, you know, look at all the positives, look at all the good things that are happening. What that tends to do, even though it comes from a really good place, is it tends to really minimize the individual's experience and doesn't allow them to therefore communicate about it or communicate around what's going on. Next slide, Mel.
Ugh, it doesn't want to move.
Not moving forward. I wonder if you click out of slideshow if it will work.
Yeah.
And then you just go to the not so pretty view of the slides.
All right, I'm gonna have to do it that way. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. So when we also talk about trauma, we tend to put it into three different buckets. There's acute trauma, there's chronic trauma, and there's complex trauma. So acute trauma speaks about a single event, an event that's kind of contained by space and time, such as a car accident or a house fire that kind of have a beginning and an end. Chronic trauma is something that are traumas, multiple traumas that occur over time. So for example, kids might experience poverty, they might experience homelessness, they might experience bullying within the school setting. So that's kind of what chronic trauma is. Complex trauma is the one that we in residential services deal with most. And that has to do with trauma that is experienced at a very young age and is ongoing. And this is the critical piece of it, is perpetrated by adults who should be protecting and caring for the children. So what that does is it really skews and shifts a child's view of adults. And if it's traumas that occur over and over again, then the perception of the role that adults play in their lives, who they are, how they respond to situations, becomes even more deeply ingrained. So because we deal a lot with this idea of complex trauma in residential services, that means that we, in our relationships with kids, have to be really careful about how we handle them, about how we talk to them, be really mindful of our own responses to them, and that we're not putting our own frame of references onto their experiences. The last thing that we want to do is to duplicate the experience that they've had with adults. So trauma reminders, and I've finally reached this page, has to do with people, situation, places, things, or feelings that remind kids of traumatic events. They tend to be, some of them might be predictable, like if a trauma occurred in a particular location, a child might not want to go to that location. They might ask you to avoid it. They might refuse to go. Some of them are very unpredictable. Some of them might be completely out of their thinking as well until there is a reminder that pops up in front of them, and then suddenly memories and feelings come up again. It can evoke intense and disturbing feelings tied to the original trauma, and it can lead to behaviors that seem out of place but might have been appropriate at one time. So these two feelings are very closely linked, or these two things are very closely linked. This idea about these intense and disturbing feelings that are attached are what prompt the behaviors, which might seem very out of place because we're looking at the world and we're going, it's a beautiful place. Look at where we are. Look at what we're doing. This is fun. But for a kid, they might have a memory that's attached to it that is very different. So I'll just give a quick example. We had this child in one of our programs, an adolescent female, who was very connected to a female staff member, but also just was extremely triggered by her. And she sought her out, but then she would reject her, she would scream at her, she would call her names. And it took a long time for us to be able to work with the child and get her to the point and feel safe enough where she could talk about what some of the trauma was. At the end of the day, what we found out was that that particular staff member used the same perfume that her mother used. And as soon as we found that out, the staff member stopped using the perfume, and the child was able to kind of regroup and continue her relationship with a staff member. So that's just an example of some of the things that we very unintentionally might have that might trigger a kid's responses that then seem completely out of place to whatever's going on. So the impact of trauma, can you move forward, Mel? Oh, you did it, awesome. Frequent reactions to trauma reminders can keep a kid in a state of emotional upset. So they're always heightened. They're always reacting to situations. Sometimes it's what I call a sunburn kid, that nothing you do seems right. Everything you do seems to trigger a reaction. They might be seen by others as overreacting to ordinary events. One of the things that we know about trauma is that it involves some hormonal changes within the body. And when kids are continuously being triggered by things, instead of their hormone levels reducing again when the trauma is over or when the reminder is over, it stays heightened. So think about yourself. Think about when you've had an adrenaline rush and how that feels in your body. And then think about maintaining that adrenaline rush the entire day or over a week or over months. That would kind of keep any one of us in a state of emotional upset and hypervigilance and all of those things that we might see. Some other impacts of trauma reminders might be avoidance. I mentioned not wanting to go to a place where where something occurred. Isolation. The child might not want anything to do with anyone. And sometimes kids feel like they're going crazy because there's a part of them that sees there's nothing going on. So why am I feeling this way? Why am I reacting this way? So then it becomes really important to help kids just kind of feel better about it and give them some education about what might be going on. Give them some space and time to be able to hear. All right? Oh, we went there. So what you may see might be a lack of focus. Sometimes folks might think that the child has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder because they can mimic one another sometimes. You might see that state of agitation or hyperarousal because the hormonal levels don't go back down because they're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. You might see that withdrawal. You might see behaviors that appear out of context and extreme. You might see mood lability, where emotions go up and down throughout the course of a day or even an hour. A high need for control. These are the kids who have difficulty maybe following expectations or wanting to be in charge. Or if there needs to be some flexibility and you're suddenly changing gears, they might not be able to do that. And then they also have some very quick startle responses where they might be very jumpy or something like that. Next one. So what you might not see is what we call the invisible suitcase. So think about yourself. Think about what you carry around with you everywhere you go, your perspective of the world, the messages that you carry around about yourself. When we have kids coming into whatever environment they're coming into, they're bringing with them this invisible suitcase that gives them messages based on their experiences, both positive and negative, about the world, about us as adults, about other people. And for those kids who have experienced complex trauma, a lot of times it has to do with us as adults. It has to do with believing that adults lie, that we're not going to do what we say we're going to do, that we're going to get rid of them, that we're going to punish them, that it really is all of their fault, that they really are bad kids and they're stupid kids and they just don't get anything. They might even be afraid that we're going to hurt them. So all of this stuff, every time that they have a trauma reminder, is what starts to get unpacked. And that kind of drives some of the behaviors that we might all see in whatever situation it is that we have these young people. So Mel?
All right, so I'm gonna move into a section. I'm sorry, could people mute your microphones, please? So we're gonna move into a section that's more about what do we do? Like, we're out in the field. I understand there's a wide variety of outdoor educators in this meeting, anywhere from expeditional to day trips to potentially after school or nature's classroom. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to read the chat. So what I always try to think about is when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about people in chaos. And chaos is like when if you put popcorn in a microwave without a container, things will just go shooting everywhere and go crazy. And that's often what these kids are looking for, is for us to create a box, to create a container so they can feel safe when they're feeling out of control and chaotic. So there is a need for structure. Both youth and adults benefit from structure. Kids will tell you they don't want to be told what to do. The reality is kids do want the grown-ups to be in charge. They want the grown-ups to make them feel safe. They want the grown-ups to be consistent. They want the grown-ups to not try to have sex with them or hurt them or be worried about being hidden by them. So there are a lot of things that we bring to the table. And myself, as a clinician, I don't do a lot of talk therapy these days. I'm doing more adventure-based therapy. So what I believe strongly is this idea of object relations, which is some of us didn't get what we should have got. And so when we're going through the world, we're collecting other grown-ups as we move through our lifetime. And so sometimes those introjects can actually help to replace some of the hurtful, painful relationships that we had when we're younger. And as Sona was saying, when you're a child, you have to believe that the grown-ups are right. They're bigger, they're the boss of you. And if they're hitting you or making you feel horrible about what you did, it's got to be because it's your fault, because it just doesn't work in a child's brain to think that the parents, that the grown-ups aren't in charge. So traumatized youth, they struggle to navigate change, things that are unexpected, transitions can be really hard. Having something for some kids that popped up that wasn't predicted in the day can be really triggering. So that sense of structure, like when you're outlining a trip or you're outlining your afternoon or whatever it is that you're doing, your nature's classroom, if you can have a sense of schedule, I know we can't always predict what's going to happen, but if we can have a sense of what's going to happen throughout the course of the trip or the day, that can be really helpful for kids that need that sense of predictability. I also try to teach people that we need to learn how to live in an unpredictable world. So there's kind of a both and to that. Kids need clear boundaries. We need for kids to be able to focus on what's happening. Sometimes we know that we need to redirect people back to task. That's really important. Letting kids shift their energy from feeling that need to self-preserve, like that startle response that Sona was talking about all the time. People are in that heightened state, and it's really, if we can help them to calm, it can be really incredibly helpful for them, not only emotionally, but physically as well. It's not a healthy place to live when you're all the time anxious and coming from that point of high alert. Helping people get skills, obviously, around how to set and keep their own boundaries. Understanding by demonstrating what a boundary is. I apologize if this is redundant, but be prepared for people that are newer to the field, for kids to want to get information about you. For various reasons, people want to know more about us. You know, do you have kids? Are you married? Do you have a dog? You know, what do you do when you're not working? Those kinds of things. And I think we need to be ready with our responses sometimes, so that we're not caught off guard. So, you know, we'll have that kid that kind of has a crush on one of us. We have that kid that really just wants to get information. Or my response to kids, usually when they ask questions like that, is how is that helpful to you in your life to know? Because maybe it is. Maybe it is helpful for them to get an answer to one of those questions. But it's about showing that there are boundaries. Improving their communication skills, that's always helpful. You know, finding the words to articulate what's happening. As Sona was saying, you know, a lot of the trauma that people retain is random, fragmented. It's in your body. It's not articulated from beginning to end. That's what we try to do in trauma-focused therapy, is help people put their story in a sequential order. But a lot of times these kids are just coming in with a whole jangle of experiences and raw emotion, and it doesn't make sense, and they don't know when something's going to trigger them. Improving your relationship, that comes from being honest, transparent. I will not lie to kids. I will never go behind a kid's back and, you know, make them feel like I was being somehow disloyal. If I need to talk to a parent or somebody because of something that happened in the group, we're going to do that together. We're going to figure out a strategy together about how we have communication with people. We're defining the container. So when we run group in my adventure program, we do a full values commitment, which you guys probably all do as well. But we're just setting a group moire so that we've agreed to things that we're going to practice throughout the course of our, we do seasonal cycles. So throughout the course of our cycle of programming, these are the things we've agreed to. Be more kind, care about others. And then providing a safe base to return to when someone is struggling. That's also something that I've worked on in groups. Just when we have a kid who's having maybe an especially hard time, we will be prepared to stop whatever the process is happening and address what's happening in the middle of the room. Now, sometimes that can be pulling a kid aside. sometimes that can be, depending on the climate of the group, using the support of the other members of the group to say, hey, you know, dude, what's up? Like, this is not who you were yesterday. Like, can we have a conversation? How can we help? And a lot of times, the kids that we have that are kind of core members of our program have gotten pretty good at figuring out ways to support kids who are, pick a thing, you know, either coming out with, you know, transitioning, male to female, female to male, coming out with feeling sad because they were supposed to get adopted and the adoption is falling through. You know, there's so many things that run through the kids that we work with, and we try to create a landscape where people can practice kind of making themselves vulnerable, and then creating a solid enough container that if people do take that risk, that we're present and prepared to hear their story. So this talks about this slide, a window of containment. So you can see from extremes, it's really, we're talking about the fight or flight. And so on the top here, it's get away. So we'll have kids that will run away from us. They run away from the group. They literally physically move themselves away from whatever it is that's triggering them. They get agitated, anxious, can't be present, can't control themselves. In the middle here, we have the place where we've got people back in containment and where they're feeling calmer, more comfortable in the group and in their bodies. On the other end, we have people who can get to what we refer to as negative states. That negative doesn't mean like not nice. Negative means withdrawn, flat affect, no facial expressions, almost like they freeze in place. And so you might see any of those things within a course of your groups. And if you notice a behavior that's different than something that you are previously experiencing somebody, that's a really important clue to say that you want to go and check in with that kid and find out what's going on. So let me see here. I'm going to attempt, oops. I'm going to attempt this. This may not work. There's something funky going on. Bear with me 1 second. Oh, okay. Sorry, guys, I've somehow lost my ability to click on share. Oh, here we go.
How many of you are blamers? How many of you, when something goes wrong, the first thing you want to know is whose fault it is? Hi, my name is Brene. I'm a blamer. Let me just tell you this quick story. So this is a couple years ago when I first realized the magnitude to which I blame. I'm in my house. I have on white slacks and a pink sweater set, and I'm drinking a cup of coffee in my kitchen. It's a full cup of coffee. I drop it on the tile floor. It goes into a million pieces, splashes up all over me. And the first, a millisecond after it hit the floor, right out of my mouth is this: damn you, Steve. Who is my husband? Because let me tell you how fast this works for me. So Steve plays water polo with a group of friends. And the night before, he went to go play water polo. And I said, hey, make sure you come back at 10, because I can never fall asleep until you're home. And he got back like at 10:30. And so I went to bed a little bit later than I thought. Ergo, my second cup of coffee that I probably would not be having had he come home when we discussed. Therefore, and so the rest of that story is I'm cleaning up the kitchen. Steve calls, caller ID. I'm like, hey. He's like, hey, what's going on, babe? What's going on? So I'll tell you exactly what's going on. I'm cleaning up the coffee that spilled all, like dial tone. Because he knows. How many of you go to that place when something bad happens, the first thing you want to know is whose fault is it? I'd rather it be my fault than no one's fault. Because why? Why? Because it gives us some semblance of control. But here, if you enjoy blaming, this is where you should stick your fingers in your ear and do the na thing, because I'm getting ready to ruin it for you. Because here's what we know from the research. Blame is simply the discharging of discomfort and pain. It has an inverse relationship with accountability. Accountability, by definition, is a vulnerable process. It means me calling you and saying, hey, my feelings were really hurt about this, and talking. It's not blaming. Blaming is simply a way that we discharge anger. People who blame a lot seldom have the tenacity and grit to actually hold people accountable, because we spend all of our energy raging for 15 seconds and figuring out whose fault something is. And blaming is very corrosive in relationships, and it's one of the reasons we miss our opportunities for empathy. Because when something happens and we're hearing a story, we're not really listening. We're in the place where I was, making the connections as quickly as we can about whose fault something was.
And I have one more that I wanted to show you real quick.
Hey, it's number one back.
Oh. You know what? I don't know. Oh my gosh. All right, forget him. Oh my God. Okay. Okay, guys. Sorry about that. I'm going to stop playing with those kind of things. So building a box. When someone does something or says something that you think is weird or irrational, try not to judge or discount their feelings. Try to be present. Don't minimize what the kid is saying or what the person is saying. It's really important that we're not giving the message that what they're saying isn't huge and really important for them in this exact moment in time. Ooh. Hold on. Whatever the person is going through, it might be the most important thing in their life at the moment. So we need to try to give honor and respect to whatever it is that is triggering them and not discount their feelings. Giving space is really important. So allowing personal space tends to decrease a person's anxiety, can help prevent acting out behavior. So giving a good foot and a half away from somebody so that they're not feeling crowded or threatened by you, it can be really, really important. If there's a situation where you have to go in and do hands-on, or somebody's being really unsafe, you need to touch them, put hands on them. It's important to let them know that you're coming. Like, you know, for example, we had a kid who we were up snowboarding, and we had a kid who started to threaten to throw himself into a frozen lake. And we obviously were not going to allow that to happen. So we had to go in and say, listen, we're going to come, we're going to steer you away from this water. This is not safe. And we talked him through what was happening. Also, if something like that happens, I don't know people's, what people use for any kind of what's the word I want? We use Crisis Prevention Institute. I don't know if you guys use any kind of de-escalation models, but it's really important if you do have to put hands on a kid, if something has happened that required that to happen, that you are processing with them afterward. And I make a point to always sort of, you know, take a look at what my role could have been in the situation, and apologize if there was something that happened that I, as an adult, should have prevented. So the more a person loses control, the less they hear your words. So it's really important for you to understand that people may not be able to benefit from anything that you are trying to say. It may be important just to sort of hang with them and be with them and allow them to do what they need to do. Sometimes silence can be really helpful. The nonverbals that you're giving to people can be also really helpful. So when I find a kid is getting really upset or uptight, I try to go to a wicked place of calm. So I might even, if a kid is getting loud and big, I might even sit down and get small. I make my voice really quiet. My voice is already really quiet, but if I notice that a kid's going off, as opposed to trying to rise up and meet them in their agitation, I'm going to want to try to back down and model being calm and being slowed down. That can be hugely important. Focus on feelings. That's really important too. The facts don't matter. So as Sona was saying before, remaining calm, rational, and professional versus challenging their belief state in the moment. You know, saying that, come on, this is a great day, we're having a great time. Like, what are you doing? Why are you freaking out right now? It's really important for you to say to kids, I understand that things are really hard for you right now, and I'm here. And I'm grateful that you're able to be real with me, and I so much appreciate that. Use your team. So I'm hoping that you guys have a second person at least with you when you're on a trip or on an outing. And it's important to be able to sort of do that differentiation when it makes sense for you to pull the group together and support the person as a group, or when it's time to pull somebody aside and then try to process with them one-to-one. It doesn't always have to be the leader. I mean, if someone is leading an activity and the youth or the person who is disrupting needs to be kind of taken aside, use your team and have them do that. And we work out often within our group. You know, there are kids who will get on. I am very patient. There are far and few kids that have really gotten me to a place where I've needed to say to another staff member, I just need you to take this over for now. But it's happened probably in my career 5 or 7 times when I really needed somebody else to just take over for a bit. So when kids want to ask, you know, challenging questions like, who are you? You're not the boss of me, you know, those kinds of things. It's important just to avoid overreacting, avoid answering those challenging questions. just continue to be supportive. Tell yourself that you can handle what's happening, that you know what to do, that you're going to be calm, that the control that you need to have is within you, as opposed to needing to feel like you need to be the smartest person in the room and fix this. Sometimes it's just hanging and meeting where kids are at is the most helpful. Sometimes, again, I'm not sure about your situation, but in our situation, there are times when if we addressed every single behavior, we would just be yelling at these kids all the time. I'm just gonna check, there's some people chatting.
I responded, Mel.
Okay, good. So benign neglect is really ignoring a behavior. So if I have a kid who is all over the place, absolutely freaking out, and he's saying, you know, swear words in public, that is not the behavior that I'm going to choose to address in the moment. I need to pick and choose the battles, and sometimes it really is about even doing a parallel process. So if I have a kid over here who is doing whatever they're doing, you know, having a horrible day, committing all these behaviors. We had a kid, actually this happened, had a kid, we were at a state park and he was clearly looking for some containment, clearly. And he'd gone over to a tree with a big stick and it was beating on the tree with the stick, just sort of fine, but the rangers weren't exactly great with that solution. And so then he started to pick up rocks and throwing rocks at myself and at my coworker. And again, was he really trying to throw the rocks? So I was trying to gauge whether or not the rocks were like half-heartedly being thrown at me, or was he really going to intend to get me? Or then he was threatened to get the car. So there was a point at which, you know, we really did need to address the behavior. But up until we addressed the behavior, my coworker and I had a conversation, which was, you know, with each other, a parallel process. So I would say, geez, it feels like he's really just not having a great day. I don't know what's going on. Do you have any idea what's going on? And my coworker would respond. And so that processing back and forth can be helpful sometimes for kids to just sort of listen to the dialogue. And then they might be like, well, that's not true. That's not what's going on. And so then you get to sort of engage them. Oh, great. Well, help me understand what's happening. So that's just a technique that I like to have in my back pocket. Clear and simple enforceable limits are so important. If you set a boundary and you set a limit that you can't enforce, you've just messed up your container. It really, my rule is it has to be something that it's about me doing. So if it's about me removing myself from the situation or me taking the group of kids away from the situation, then I know that I can do that, right? Like that's within my control. So if it's about me needing to make a phone call or me saying that we need to together call your parent, then I have control over those things. If I tell you, you know, go sit down over there on that log, if you're not in a place where you're going to be able to listen, then I have no way to enforce that. So holding silence is really important too. It can be counterintuitive almost to allow time for reflecting on what is happening with this child, but often just being with somebody is important. The clip I wanted to show you guys from Brene, because I think Brene is so amazing. She talks about just thanking the person for being there and present with them, and I only wish I could make things better. Thank you for trusting me enough to share. So again, triaging the rules, what is negotiable, what is not. So for example, if you have a kid who you're on a trip and they want to use a certain sleeping bag, or they've taken another kid's sleeping bag that kid wanted to use, and you know, I think it's deciding, is that a battle that's worth picking, or is that something that we can solve otherwise and then address later with this kid? You know, you kind of upset this person by taking the sleeping bag that they were planning to use. It's something that Dr. Ross Green, if you ever want to read something about disrupting kids, it's called The Explosive Child. It's actually a pretty good book. It's a little dated, but it talks about helping people picking and choosing. You know, the bottom line is safety. So when we're out with kids, if it's about, I wanted to have an apple, not an orange, or I wanted Teddy Grahams versus, you know, whatever. If the kid is doing something that isn't a threat to anybody's safety, I would put that on the back burner and address that at another time, especially if you're out someplace remote and you don't want to trigger a kid. It's finding that balance of creating a good container, but also not getting to the point where you're challenging somebody and potentially instigating more explosive behavior. So I had some case studies that I wanted to share with people that have happened within our adventure-based programming. Things that I've learned from, things that I totally messed up, things that in the rearview mirror, I actually learned a lot, but I missed some signs and symptoms. So we had a young woman who was from Haiti in one of our programs couple 3 years ago, and she was fantastic. She was just like a totally upbeat member of the group, just really, really positive, and just showed up every day ready to work, smile on her face. And we went for a camping trip. So at the end of every one of our cycles, we do some kind of overnight something. And so this time we were doing a 2-night overnight. You know, nothing major. It was car camping. We weren't off the grid or anything like that. But so we had started the day by taking kids out ziplining, and I was up on a platform, it's a very small platform, and it was windy. So the trees were waving and the leaves were blowing, and she said to me, "Mel, what's going on with the trees? Why are they moving?" And I'm like, "Listen, baby girl, it's okay. You know, they're just waving to you. That's all." And so as the day continued, we finished that activity. We set up camp. We went to the campground. Day was fine. We went for swimming. We did some hiking. Got back to the campground. It was time to settle down into tent. And all of a sudden, this girl is starting to completely disrupt. And to the point where she would not get in her tent. She would not stay in her tent. The other kids were like, "What is happening with you? Like, stop, it's time to sleep." And so really, like, I got to the point where I was like, "I'm going to need to take you home." And which really set her off, which was everything that Sona talked about in that suitcase. So here she's having a hard time, and I'm telling her she's going to be rejected by me, and I'm taking her home. Like, big mistake on my part. So at the end of the day, she got herself, she was so worked up, she screamed at me, pardon the language, but she's like, "You old fucking ugly bitch." And I'm like, "Oh. I am not a bitch." And maybe, and she just looked at me and we both cracked up. She was like, "Oh my God." And from there, we were able to process like all what was happening. She had been part of in the earthquakes in Haiti. So these trees moving, getting to camp. So after the earthquake, she had been living in a tent campground. So all of these things were being triggered, and I missed it, you know. So we processed that. We sat down, we cried it out. I apologized for my mistake and my contribution into this turning into such a difficult night for her. And I was so proud because she came back she stayed for the second night. And it was a really healing thing, I think, for her to finally figure out, you know, some of what was happening for her. And it was powerful for us to have had that experience. So that's another situation where we had a kid who just got set off. We were going along, doing our day. I remember this was another overnight. This kid, somebody had come up from behind on him. Bear in mind, that's never good. So don't ever approach anybody from behind, tap somebody in the shoulder from behind. you might just get punched in the face. Some people with that heightened startle will, so that happened, that somebody had gone behind this kid earlier in the day. We were at a challenge course, and he had kind of, blew up a little bit, but then he was back in control. So we got to the place where we were going to stay for the overnight, and it was like a bunkhouse. So bunk beds everywhere. We walked in, and he just lost his mind. I think seeing the beds and the close proximity and the fact that we were all going to be sleeping in this one room just flashed him right back to sexual trauma. And he just, we worked really hard to maintain him in the overnight and keep him with and manage his trauma. But he and I actually, at the end of the day, made a decision that it would be better for him to return home because he just couldn't find a way to be safe there. So those were just a couple of things that I learned. So do people have questions? Comments?
I didn't quite get the difference between the circumstance with the young man and the circumstance with the young woman. What was it that made it better for him to leave, but for her to stay?
That's a great question, because I think we worked really hard to see if he could stay, but at the end of and this is, we're probably talking about 2 a.m. at this point, at the end of the day, he just could not get that trauma response under control. He wasn't going to feel safe there. He wasn't going to be able to feel safe in that room with those people, with those beds. And I mean, he started yelling things like, "I'm not going to let anybody rape me." And it really just got to be to the point where he and I both agreed, and my other co-leader, that he was just going to feel safer to go home.
Thank you.
I think that was a great question. I don't know how much you guys know about people's history, so that's a whole nother thing. We have the opportunity to do a pretty good intake with folks. So we have a lot of the backstory. We don't always have everything though.
I think there was another question about how do you facilitate these conversations with the students to understand the situations.
Can whoever had that question clarify for me what the intent?
So
Yeah. So in the in the situation where like you were talking to the girl versus the boy, like how, and I guess you kind of answered my question by saying that you already knew a bit of their background, but like basically how did you handle those conversations to the point where you figured out that that was what the trigger was?
This kid was pretty clear in the bunkhouse what was happening. I mean, it was pretty clear to me because he was screaming things that were reminiscent of sexual trauma. So I was pretty clear in understanding. I mean, the young lady in our campground, the other thing that was happening is this was a complex trauma situation for sure. Not only did she live through this earthquake problem, but she has also been sexually traumatized by her father, who was incarcerated in a prison that was closer to this campground than her home where she was residing. So that whole thing was another factor. And she was telling me that she thought she saw him in the woods, and clearly he was not in the woods. So there was some overlapping trauma, and once she was able to talk about that, and I was able to reassure her that there's no way, he's in jail, he didn't get out, we would know, they would call, they would let us know, you would know. So that was also another way to help her settle.
I think a big key, if I might now, to having these conversations is to use your team so that you have space and time in order to have the conversation, so you don't have to end it too abruptly. And then secondly, to never assume that we know. It's easy. You know, I'm a licensed mental health counselor like Mel. I've been doing this for a long time. So it's easy to assume that I know because I can think, oh, I've seen this before. I've worked with other kids who are like this before. But what that does is it doesn't give kids the opportunity to tell their story.
Right.
So going into it with the assumption that I don't know and I need to find out is a great way to open up a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's nothing more gratifying than somebody being curious, curiously concerned about what's happening and sincere. And you've got to be genuine with these guys. They have bullshit detectors that will kick in if you aren't real. You know, that's just, you just can't. You'll lose people. They'll lose respect for you. It's really important just to be genuine and present. And I think one of the things that can be really hard is being prepared to hear some stories. Now, I have some staff that are super young in my program and just interns or brand new to the field. And we drive kids, we provide transportation. And a lot of times where the heavy conversations happen are in the car and when they're alone with these guys. And so I had one staff, gosh, it's always an overnight. It's not always, but every story that comes up has been an overnight. I had one staff who drove a kid home because she also felt like she could not be safe. She also, long story short, she was calling a person from another kid's phone that she wasn't supposed to have communication with, and it was getting complicated, and there were some legal issues that were actually being stepped over. So we made a decision that we needed to return her to her recovery hospital, which is where she was staying. And in the course of that drive, she started to talk about her sexual trauma and start to talk story with this young woman who came back to the climbing gym, which was where we were doing our overnight. And she just looked at me and completely fell apart. And just, you know, it's a heavy burden to carry people's stories with you. And it's so important to understand the vicarious trauma that can happen. So if a kid or a person on a lot of times it's going to happen when you're outside in these spaces that we take people to. If somebody starts to go there, try to be ready to receive the gift that they're trying to give you, which is, you know, their story. And if that happens, get someone to debrief with you, find somebody with your team to debrief with you so you're not carrying that secondary trauma with you. If we don't do that on a regular basis, we can all suffer compassion fatigue. And that's something that we have to constantly be on the lookout, because if there's a point at which I don't care, I should not be doing this job. And I think it's incredibly important. And again, I don't know people's backgrounds, but I mean, a lot of times people are going into this because you just want to get people outside and you just want to, you know, do cool stuff and teach fun things and, you know, make people environmental stewards. And I think we do that. But we also run into, seriously, by creating those opportunities to challenge yourself and push out of the comfort zone, we're also, especially with trauma histories, we're also challenging people inadvertently to do that with those things.
Well, there's
Mel,
a couple,
in
go
the
ahead.
sorry, in the interest of time, can we, we've got a few more questions that have come in.
Sure.
So the first one is, do you credit the problem in the story with the girl in the earthquake? Do you credit the problem to not knowing enough of the child's story or not paying enough attention to the signs of discomfort that happened earlier in the day?
To be honest, I did not know that she had been in the earthquake and lived in a campsite. I did not know that piece of information. But that said, I still felt personally, as somebody with 20 plus, 25 plus years of experience working with kids, that I botched that situation. I felt like I should have seen that she was starting to unravel. And you know, do I lose sleep over it? No, because I'm human, and we're all human. And we were trying to do like a pretty intense activity that was a lot of focus on safety and making sure that people were, you know, getting up to the launch platform safely. So there's a lot of stuff going on. So like when that was starting to unfold, I was quite honestly, I was distracted a little bit. And I think it happens. I think these things can happen. That's not the most important part of that, what happened that night. The most important part was we got to a place where we both could own that we had just gotten ourselves to a place that was really hard to handle, and we got there together and we got out of it together. So I feel like that was the most important place, that we were able to put some closure, and I think she learned some stuff about herself that day too.
I just wanted to reiterate that to what Mel said, that it's not what we miss, it's how we recover from what we miss, because the reality is we're all human beings and we're all going to miss stuff at some point or another. But if we leave it missed and we don't go back and either fix it or try to figure out what the problem is, we miss a learning opportunity for everybody. But we're going to miss things, we're going to mess up. And it's okay to say sorry, it's okay to go back and fix it if you possibly can. And that's where the learning and the growth comes in. It's not in the avoidance of a situation, it's in the recovery from a situation that the real growth and learning can come in.
See, Amy has a question.
Yeah, so there's 3 more questions that have come in, but if anyone needs to go, this is technically the end, but Mom and Mel, if you are willing to stay for a few more minutes, I would love for these questions to get answered. So
I would be more than happy to stay. This is my world right now, so having a bunch of other people in it is fantastic.
Great. So the next one that came in was, what is your connection with parents, and do you keep the children's feelings and thoughts private unless they require reporting? So one thing that I want to address with this question is that you guys might want to say what your not you introduce yourselves, but we're coming from a different requirements in terms of what you guys do as their counselors versus what we do as a different kind of counselor / facilitator. So what we're required or what we're supposed to do is a little different. But yeah, so that's the question.
Well, I'm also a marriage and family therapist, so I think systemically. So whenever possible, we want the child's 3 domains, which is school, community, and home, to sort of be in sync with each other. So there are definitely times when, let me just back up 1 second. Do never get yourself caught into a place where you're perceived to be keeping a secret. That is big trouble. So if a kid feels like they have a relationship with you where you're secret keeping, that also can be a huge trigger, because adults that asked them to keep secrets in the past have asked them to do that for not good reasons. So be cautious about that. If a kid says to me, can I say something to you and you're not going to tell my parents? My typical response is, that's going to depend on if it has to do with anything illegal or unsafe. And if it's something that we talk about and I feel strongly that a parent should be part of the conversation, again, I'm not gonna go behind the kid's back, but I will say to the kid, you know what, I really think that somebody needs to know that you're feeling this way, and let's make a plan about how to do that. Do you want to do it together? Do you want to do it? And then I'll call and follow up. Like, how are we going to work that out? And that would be, I am gonna just tell you that I'm back on the computer with my, what I believe is a trolling creeper, girlfriend from California. And one of the things that we do on the computer when we're bored is we cut. And yeah, I'm not gonna hold on to that one. If a kid came and said, I think I might be gay, I would be curious to find out how are you going to get support from your family, but I'm not going to assume that the family would be able to provide support necessarily. I mean, Sona, weigh in here. What do you say?
So I agree. I think if part of the intent of interventions that we have, and for us as adults who are hoping to develop trust, I don't, if I have to talk to a parent, I will always tell a kid, and I will try to have the child talk with me. There are certain situations where I might not do that, but for the most part, if I can have the child come with me and talk with the parent, then that's almost like a bonus, because you're, developing a skill as well as, kind of building that communication, that systemic perspective.
Thank you. The next question that came in was, do you have any best practices for communication between staff members during a behavioral incident, especially between those who have been in the field, so they're out with the students, and then those coming in to support?
So one of the things that we teach in terms of risk management, let me just tell you that we're not off the grid. So we're not, these kids are not, I mean, car camping is, you would think that we were in Siberia. I also work with kids with autism and adults with autism, and there's that whole set of difficulty. One of the things that we teach for risk management is if a kid starts to head down the street, take your phone. Never leave the group without your phone. And if I see a situation happening, like when that kid was throwing rocks at the state park, I noticed that he was getting a more positive response from another staff member. So she kind of stepped in. I was being the one that was trying to sort of set limits with him. She stepped in, and I just did a little flyby with her phone, like, here you go, see you later. But to us, that's key, because if I know that Brian has run down the road after a kid, and now I'm getting a message that this kid is standing in the middle of the street trying to get run over, we're going to be making a decision about who else is going to go out, and second him, and are we going to call the police? Yeah, in that situation, we ended up having to call the police.
Yeah, and I would just add to that prep is great. Just as people prep activities or lesson plans, you can also prep roles in terms of your team. If you've got more than one person, you can always prep those roles, including who is going to be the communicator with individuals coming into a group or a situation to assist.
Did that answer that question?
Thank you.
Something else that we do, and we have to be very careful about how we do it, but we will sometimes use a group text to communicate. Hey, can you just come and check in with me because somebody had something to say on the car ride to the program? And so we do that too.
Thank you. The last one that's come through is what suggestions you have for alternatives to removing students from program versus safety of themselves and other students. Connection seems to be the root of addressing these problems, yet removing students from the program disconnects them. Can you speak to that?
Sure. I mean, we have a reputation at LUK. I mean, the kids that we are taking are not fluffy puppies and rainbows. These are kids that are sometimes gang involved or peripherally gang involved, substance abusing. So these are not easy kids, and we pride ourselves on not giving up on kids. So whenever we can, try to hold on to a kid, putting into place, like, I'm trying to think of the last kid we had to do this with. We may have had a situation in a group where we may have had to call it. If somebody was doing something that was either incredibly unsafe or very, very aggressive and unkind to another member, that's not going to happen. I'm not having that. If we need to call the day short, and then what we'll do is we'll pull the kid in either the following day or as soon as we possibly can to say, the hell was happening right now? I mean, honestly, this is not the kid that I met 3 days ago. Like, what is happening? We can't have that. And generally speaking, when you get a kid one-to-one, these are kids that don't get any, it's not true, let me back up. Kids don't get a lot, or a lot of these kids don't get positive one-to-one adult regard. And we know that through research that those things build resiliency, just that in and of itself. So, and then add on the experience of having adults be involved with them through sports or activity is also resiliency building. So they want to be with us as much as we want to be with them. And I would say 9 times out of 10 that when we pull in and do that intervention, like what can we put in place here that we can help you to manage through, because we can't have that here. So I had one kid who had very, very, very serious separation anxiety. Like, he was obsessed with cell phones. He collected cell phones, and they didn't even have to work. They made him feel safe. So one of the things that we did with him is he developed this little sort of sign to me that he was starting to go to that place. And when we were doing our dirt bike program, and one of the things that he did that we ended up having to intervene about was he would knock down the bikes. And these are not cheap machines, so he was going around kicking over bikes. So we had to call it for that day. But afterward, we had our intervention, and he had a signal. It's kind of stupid, actually. It's his signal, but I'm like, way to blend, dude. He wanted to go like this when he was having trouble. And I'd pull him aside and let him make a phone call, because that's really what it was about. Is there was a domestic violence situation at home, and when he wasn't with his mother, he got incredibly anxious about if she was okay. So that's just one example. We've done ticketing systems, we've done rewards, we've done earning Legos. I never use food as a reward. I don't believe in doing that. I think it sets you up for a whole bunch of other issues. But yeah, I would say it's very rare that we've had a kid that we've put on pause and not re-entered into the program. I'd really have to look, but I'd say probably not more than 7. And I've been doing this program for 16 years. Not to say we haven't had kids quit. Certainly had that.
All right, well, thank you. I haven't seen any more questions come in, but thank you both, Sana and Mel, for doing this. And for everyone who has been asking, this is recorded, and they are willing to share the slideshow with us. So you should get information later from AEOE around all of this, not just this webinar.
Yeah, also Kelly, just so you know, I was not able to embed any video links. For some reason, my PowerPoint wouldn't let it, but in the slides that I had intended to show you video, the links are there so that you can put them in your browser and see the video if people choose to.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Emily, yes, email, that's fine.